Today's guest is someone I've known for a good few years now, isn't it? Someone who sits at the frontier of nature recovery, green finance and ecological ambition, in your words. I don't think I've ever met anyone who knows more about our green and pleasant lands more than yourself. And you frustrate me, Gil, because you're someone who comes across so naturally in front of a lens or on stage without being formally media trained that, every time we've ever done any film work, I'm like, wish I had what you had. And you just bring a smile to everything. No matter what the circumstance, I'm making you blush now, aren't I?
It's a grimace at the moment rather than a smile.
So, Gil Martin, the Commercial and Natural Capital Director at Restore. Genuinely, I believe you're one of the UK's most expert minds in restoring natural processes, supporting regenerative food production, and using natural capital as a catalyst for change. And you also just love getting hands-on in the soil, don't you? And getting people to reimagine how we can reshape how we value and connect with our landscape. So welcome to Shifting the Narrative. Hi, Gil.
Hi, and thanks for inviting me. And thanks for an introduction that I stand no chance of living up to. Thanks so much, Joss.
So I'm keen to just dive into your personal journey, explore the role of things like land use whilst unpacking the very messy but very important world of everything from rewilding to finance to food systems to farming. And ultimately how this can all support our rapidly changing climate, rapidly changing natural world, and I would say rapidly changing narrative. But I've known you for a few years, and what I don't know is where all this began. I can imagine muddy wellies, tractors, dens. Where did your love for nature start?
Perhaps not where you imagine. So I grew up on a street. I grew up in a town, and before he retired, my dad was a plumber. So I didn't grow up immersed in long grass and in farms and in a long-lived kind of agricultural family. But I did grow up with a kind of hereditary yearning for nature connection. Kind of, as far as I can tell, started with my granddad, who worked in the Forestry Commission. And I didn't hear this story until relatively recently, but heard my dad tell the story about every morning he would get up and have breakfast with my granddad before he went to work. And my granddad would fill his heart and mind full of the stories about when they would get their own small holding and the crops they would plant and the animals they would grow and the things they would do as a genuine kind of plan for what they would do in the future when they got there. And it never quite happened. But that set my dad on a journey of kind of yearning, unfulfilled nature connection. And he did something broadly similar with me. And so we ended up talking about how we would do similar things. Yeah. And so that kind of hereditary yearning to be connected with nature and to nature got passed down from my granddad to my dad to me. So I went and got my nature fix in a sort of less romantic way. I climbed over fences. I lived, like I say, in a town next to an airport, near a canal, near a golf course, near an army training area. And I would go and climb over fences or kind of lift up tins or slightly kind of go to places where I wasn't supposed to go. And I got this heady blend of nature connection, guerrilla style, and a little bit of thrill of being in places I was not supposed to be.
That kind of adventure, inspiring curiosity.
Yeah, it felt dangerous. But really, what I was going and doing, I was kind of nesting and finding bird nests and making rafts and just building that connection with nature through adventure, irrespective of that upbringing or that kind of specific geographical location. And it all started, I suspect, from my granddad. There were a few tractors in there. So he worked for the Forestry Commission, lived in a tied cottage in the middle of some woods. And every moment I could possibly afford, I would jump on my bike, cycle over there, and he'd go to sleep in his chair, and I'd fire his air rifle or have him make a fire or go walking in the woods. And when he was working, he had this tractor, and he would lift me up in the bucket and tip me out from a great height. And so there were some cool, some privileges in there, which definitely formed the building blocks of where we are now.
I can imagine that bike was a prized possession.
A prized possession, yeah. It was quite a long way away, but nothing would stop me on a weekend or a summer holiday getting over there, spending all my time collecting newts and frogs. It helped that my nan did a lot of baking, so we're never far away from a chocolate chip muffin. But so that's the starting point, I think.
And what about the kind of the endless stats and facts about our natural world that you're so good at? I mean, yeah, was there a moment that you knew that there was a career path as a nature lover?
I think probably always inevitable. So a bit like a bit of toast falling butter side down. I think it was entirely inevitable that I was just going to work in this space. I never really did anything else. I tried the odd thing here and there, but a bit of a fish out of water. So for my entire career, I've been exploring that nature connection, fumbling through, trying to define it. So I've worked in agriculture and food production. I've worked in conservation for the National Trust. I've worked in land management, and I've been sort of feeling my way for what is it that I'm really searching for. And to an extent, it's all of those things. But actually, what it really comes down to is something more fundamental than any one of those elements. It's just that nature piece, nature connection, nature restoration. I think it was always going to be my journey. The only question was when and how and what shape would it take.
But I can see you spending time out in nature, but learning that rich kind of depth of it feels like all you do is read books, and you maybe got photographic memory of different stats and facts. Like, yeah, where's that come from? I know it's one of the great kind of pub party tricks that I've seen is you being able to reel just the most out there statistics. Where did that come from? Was that books or was that formal courses?
It's maybe a mix, but lots of people will be able to speak to this. When you're genuinely passionate about something, you spend your time imbibing it wherever you go. It's the places you choose to go on your time off. It's the things you choose to read when you've got a spare 5 minutes. If my wife was here now, she'd be laughing at you suggesting that I've got a photographic memory, because I don't really remember anything unless I'm really interested in it, and then I remember everything. So it comes from a place of passion. And you can see it in lots of people who are passionate about something. They just gradually absorb all this information almost recreationally, and that feeds into their career, which itself is a product of that passion. So when both of those things live in the same space, then you can benefit from the culmination of your personal life and your career life. And that probably describes what makes me have a bit of a stock of knowledge or facts, which seem really striking or impressive, but mostly because it's quite a specialist field. So when I'm chatting to someone about a specific bit of nature, most of the time it's not their currency, so it seems much more impressive than it is.
Go on, entertain me. What's your most recent learning fact or stat, or what's your go-to?
I can't promise I'll entertain you, but so I will get into what I do and why I do it, which is about finding ways to make nature restoration commercially viable, to make it happen at pace and at scale. And what that leads me to do is to start to think about the big picture. So what levers do I really have to pull to get people to be motivated? So let's do some facts about the context for the space that you and I work in. Starting with people, there's never been more people on the planet than there are today, rapidly rising population. So 8.2 billion people on the planet, not a great surprise to anyone. I'm sure we all know that fact. Then let's look at, conversely, insects. Insects are in stark decline. So insecticides, farming, land use change, climate change, all having a really detrimental effect on the number of insects and the abundance and the variety of insects. But if we took one example, ants. So there are 20 quadrillion ants on the planet right now.
What?
So that's 20,000 million ants on the planet as we speak.
20,000 million ants on the planet.
Yep. I mean, I suspect that's something of a formulaic estimate.
Yeah.
But there's 2.5 million ants for every person on the planet.
What?
And we find ourselves at a moment where there are fewer insects than there's ever been. Ants are fundamental to so many life cycles of other animals. They're fundamental to so many broader ecosystems. They are a platform on which so much of the life on Earth is built. So fascinating and massively in excess of the amount of humans on the planet. If we go more broad than that, insects themselves, not just ants, there's 1.4 billion insects for every human that there is on the planet.
Wow.
So there's a huge discrepancy in scale between ourselves and insects as a kind of demonstrator of the natural world. Let's get more broad. So Earth herself. So planet Earth has existed for 5.4-ish billion years and will exist for billions of years to come. Life on Earth has existed for a really long time. So dinosaurs existed for 165 to 180 million years. Crocodiles have existed continuously for 200 million years in various forms.
Yeah.
Humans, Homo sapiens, us, we have existed for 315,000 years. So what that tells us, if anything, is that we are a tiny part of a much, much bigger system. And although we are having tremendous impacts in the 5 minutes that we've been on the scene, we're having huge impacts. And some of those impacts and extinctions and changes are heartbreaking. The reality is we are harming ourselves and Earth will persist and will survive. And so I think the context that needs to give us is often we look at attending to climate crisis, biodiversity crisis as a values proposition that comes somewhere from your heart, which of course it is, but it's so much more than that. It is in fact a survival proposition. I think there's a very real chance that if we can't reverse out of our overconsumption kind of non-circular way of living, humanity might well be a flash in the pan on a global scale. And that is the lens through which we've got to view our work and the situation we face if we're going to stand a chance of traction and momentum within the time frame that we need it. So
it's the ultimate shifting of the narrative, isn't it?
Yeah, let's talk survival, not ESG.
Yeah. Before I ask you what you do in a professional manner, I'm very interested to know what your favorite insect is and why.
Oh, that's a really good question. So I'm going to avoid the kind of glamorous stuff because there are beautiful glowworms, there's beautiful butterflies, odonata, dragon and damselflies, but my favorite insect is probably a functional favorite. So I like dung beetles. I like dung beetles because they are barometers of healthy landscapes. So in an organic system, as in on a system which is not being corrupted and suppressed by insecticides through perhaps agricultural applications, when dung hits the ground from a wild animal, from the gut of that animal and from the surrounding landscape comes fauna. Dung beetles come from out of the woodwork, although not woodwork, out of the soil from all directions, and they start to break it down, drag that organic matter into the soil, cycle the nutrients, and it's a building block of all of the vegetation and therefore all of the animals that live on top of that vegetation thereafter. And we haven't noticed that they've disappeared. And so when we want to see a dung beetle, we watch a David Attenborough documentary when they are the building block of our own landscape. And so unsung heroes, I'll go for dung beetles.
Love it. Put you on the spot there. But yeah, I mean, over the last half a year to a year, you've been working at Restore as the commercial and natural capital director. Tell us what you do there. What is that role and what is Restore?
So Restore is, and let me approach this from a different direction. Restore are a group of naturalists and ecologists with a totally singular mission, which is highly ambitious ecosystem restoration at scale and at pace. And that, I think, is intoxicating. How many businesses do you find that are totally singular in their approach and their objectives and in their ambition? That really suits me. So that was really attractive. So they do that by delivering landscape change on existing landholders, either farming enterprise or estates or lands or NGOs. And what I do for them is I try and remove the barriers to people saying no. And it's less likely that people are saying no. It's more create the environment that allowed people to say yes.
Yeah.
So I come at this from a commercial angle. I too am a naturalist and a kind of lifelong nature enthusiast, as we've discussed. But the role that I play at Restore is to create the environment where people can say yes to more nature restoration, to higher ambition nature restoration more quickly, so we can do more in the limited time that we all have in our lives. And I do that by demonstrating commercial opportunity.
Yeah.
So if there is a powerful commercial incentive, two things can happen. The landowner can see something that might replace their current activities, or at least supplement their current activities. They could make more money, which makes the difficult act of change. Change is always difficult. We've been doing something for generations. Being asked to do something different, something very different, is challenging. So if you're offering commercial parity, and I'm asking for that very difficult change, you're unlikely to make headway. So can I offer something much better than commercial parity? Can I offer something which is commercially exciting? And the short answer is yes, we can. And then once you can offer something which is commercially exciting, once you've got demonstrable revenue potential, then the other thing that you can offer is the other thing that demonstrable revenue potential facilitates is people who are willing to invest and provide capital to get to some of those returns that the revenue generates. So we're able to say to landowners now, we can pivot your landscape with ecological ambition as the absolute focus. We can generate some revenues at the back end, which will show some return for your commitment, your endeavor, your ambition. And because those revenue potentials are quite robust, what we can also do is we can find investment that will pay for all the work. The single biggest barrier, that's perhaps not the single, one of the most significant barriers to ecological ambition is budget. So I'd really like to re-meander that river, but I don't have the budget to do it. So instead, we'll pull back and we'll have a moderated ecological vision. Well, that's not the way that Restore wish to work. What we want is to push that ecological ambition. So we can now come with investment funds to pay for the project, we can deliver the project, and we can generate returns. And it is our feeling that should unlock momentum at the sort of pace and scale that the urgency of our current situation requires.
How do you define ecological ambition?
We're trying to finish a jigsaw puzzle that we don't have all the pieces to. So that jigsaw puzzle is one of complex, interconnected ecosystems that each supplement and contribute and are dependent on each other, ultimately self-sustaining by virtue of their cycles and their interconnectedness. And when we visit a landscape, that landscape is kind of telling us, just beneath the layer of either agricultural activity or forestry or whatever it might be, you can see underneath the surface what that landscape wants to be. And we're trying to build back that ecological complexity. We're trying to kickstart that process to a point where it can be self-sustaining going forward. We don't have all the pieces of the jigsaw, so we end up having to intervene a lot. Yeah. So whether that is, like I say, re-meandering rivers or kickstarting soil health with mycorrhizal transplants or whatever it might be, we're trying to kind of cut corners, we're trying to cheat, we're trying to crank the handle of the engine to get those natural systems and processes going. Now that approach can operate in a pure kind of full bells and whistles ecosystem restoration project, like a rewilding project, where you've got functioning natural processes and the processes are the ambition, not the outputs, not the habitats. You're not trying to create habitats, you're trying to create process, and the processes themselves create habitats, and you don't choose what they are. Or we can pull back from there. Somewhere further along the spectrum is a blended agricultural food production and nature production approach, because clearly food production matters. We all need to eat. And so there is a version of this which can be done with kind of nature-friendly farming, nature-productive farming, where it not only adds an extra revenue stream to a farming enterprise, but it also underpins the productivity and the resilience of that farming enterprise over time. So it's not a compromise, it is a supercharging element to a productive farm. And they can work really well together.
And you talk a lot about natural capital being this catalyst for change. How do you explain natural capital to people outside the sector? And I guess what's its kind of role in a systemic perspective?
So a bit of a exhalation there, because we'll get to it, but I kind of wish natural capital didn't exist. But it does, and it needs to. So natural capital is the quantifiable outputs from a landscape or an ecological project. So they might be the carbon that's drawn down or sequestered. They might be the food that's produced. They might be the opportunities for nature connection. They might be the hydrological benefits of water attenuation or storage or water quality. There is an almost unlimited amount of ecosystem service or natural capital that emanates from a restoration project, if it's got enough ecological ambition. And somewhere there is someone who values those services enough to pay for them. And so natural capital exists it does two things. It allows us to quantify the loss of the outputs or services of a landscape when someone treats it badly or exploits it or harvests those elements without seeking to put them back. And it allows us to create commercial opportunity from their reinstatement. And if you can create commercial opportunity, we believe you can create traction and momentum. And boy, do we need traction and momentum right now. The reason I kind of wish that we weren't talking like that is because I wish that we could value nature for nature's sake. So to quantify nature is nearly impossible. It's gloriously complex and chaotic and spiritual. And to quantify it is really very challenging indeed. But if we don't quantify it, it will continue to be consumed without a thought for its replenishment. And if we don't quantify it, then we can't demonstrate a market for restoration. And we need restoration right now. Conservation is only part of the story to conserve what we already have. We have depleted our natural resources to the extent that we now need to look at restoring them. And someone needs to pay for that restoration. And so natural capital is a key kind of mechanism in that process.
And well, like, you know, my perspective that certain terminology in this space, whether it is ecosystem services or just the perspective of regenerative, it can be confusing. It can be jargon fueled, it can be academic, it can just sometimes be plain boring. Do we need to change the lexicon of some of the words in this space, or do we just need to tell stories better?
It's all stories. So for all of our existence, we are a species built on stories, and nothing has changed. And nature is the ultimate story. So the ultimate lubricant for momentum and success and traction is opportunity. So incredible things happen when we see opportunity. Incredible momentum takes place. There are surges of action and activity which take place when we see opportunity. So the biggest thing we can do is tell stories about those opportunities, success stories, signpost those things that have gone well, kind of promote and platform those projects and those people who are being successful in this space. And if we can demonstrate that opportunity, there will be a surge in the right direction. And in terms of the terminology, I don't care. So there was a time perhaps for perfection. It's probably about 100 years ago. We're way past perfection now. So what we now need is action and traction and momentum. And we'll have to find perfection along the way. So to give a shit about the terminology, to argue about what's the right word, what's regenerative, what's organic, is to miss the point. As long as what we are all doing today is better than what we're doing tomorrow, let's applaud it, let's learn from it, let's keep that process going.
Yeah.
And the day after tomorrow, do something even better. The reality is, I don't know everything. I don't know all the answers. It'll be in the doing that we find most of the answers. To have a polarized debate inhibits progress, and progress is what we need.
So more stories, and we clearly know that, you know, especially sat here in Bristol, where you see things like Farming Today, you see the various kind of natural history programs, the David Attenboroughs of the world. They've inspired generations. It's the ultimate storytelling. When often people say, you know, what has captured you the most, it's probably a nature-driven story. Why do businesses not use that as a technique more?
Oh, tough.
Because I don't think they do. I don't think businesses see the value of telling more stories to talk about things like nature strategies. And maybe the underpinning there is that they don't have clear enough nature strategies. But you can really connect people, employees, customers, investors.
100% makes up a significant proportion of my job. And so the businesses that I know that are tackling nature and in relation to their business are taking it in a particular order. So they're starting with risk. In fact, they're starting with dependency. So what are their dependencies on nature? And to get to the punchline here is every business is entirely dependent on nature, entirely. Yeah. Even if they can't see it in their supply chain, either it's there in their supply chain and they just can't see it, or even if they've somehow managed to get a supply chain that doesn't have a dependency on nature, every business is dependent on people, and people are entirely dependent on nature, where our food comes from, where our medicine comes from, our air, our water. It's nature.
This table.
Yeah, everything.
Drink.
So the idea that any business is anything other than entirely dependent on the natural world and healthy natural processes is nonsense. So they start with dependency, and then what risk that dependency results in. So once you realize you're dependent on something and then you realize it's at risk, what would happen to my kind of core business if I couldn't get hold of some of these key supply chain elements? And that's really useful, if a bit disappointing, because it doesn't do the thing which you and I really want to happen, which is to recognize nature for nature's sake. So the dependency and the risk piece is a piece we have to leverage. It's a way that we get momentum right now. And so we have to do that. And there are plenty of businesses who are starting to calculate their dependency, starting to see, okay, there's a budget here that I can spend in a different way on nature, which makes me a better, more robust business going forward. The evolution of that is actually businesses seeing nature as an opportunity, not as a risk. And you do that through story. You do that through cascading good news stories and connections. And business, I hope over time and very quickly, starts to see nature as an ability to attract and retain the best staff in the sector. So increasingly, staff are looking for more than just a salary package. They want purpose. They want to feel pride. They want to be part of an organization that takes responsibility. Those good news stories, that storytelling, that nature as an opportunity, also plays its part in product and service differentiation, in price point. Ultimately, we, as the people, voting with our feet and with our pounds, can steer this narrative. And so you get policy decisions and you get big business decisions from the top, but they nearly always result from an irresistible force from the bottom. And so we really hold the power. So can we stoke the fire of mass movement, mass decision making, to try and drive some of those kind of what end up being policy sound bites that get all the glory, but it comes from a groundswell of opinion and movement and spending our pound wisely. And so nature stories play into that part for a business to be able to capitalize on that. Similarly, those stories mean that things like ESG, things like winning tenders, things like getting competitive rates on capital, increasingly, they're going to be based on stories of nature positivity, investments in nature positivity, investments in corporate nature responsibility. And that all needs to be bundled up in effective comms and storytelling. So I think that storytelling is the destination. Back to the kind of earlier narrative over, we're not at a point where we can have perfection. We'll take what we can get. And so if I can get traction, movement, cash flow from an organization who's seeing business as seeing nature as through that lens of risk, then I'll do that to start with, and I'll begin to layer in the stories and see if I can't influence behaviors from within.
But it is hard though, isn't it? You know, I think a lot of people think about the investment in nature and putting nature at the heart of decision making in quite a long-term view. And when businesses, especially in tricky markets, obsessed, even kind of manufactured to just think about the short term, it is quite a hard thing to value nature if you're only thinking about short-term returns. Do you find that there's a way of breaking through that?
I can agree with what you're saying, that's really quite difficult to get out of those short-term cycles where there are demands on budget and to try and break into those demands. There are examples of organizations, though, who are spending money on nature and really making it work for them.
Yeah, who's that? Who's really standing out at the moment for you?
So Salesforce. So I suspect you weren't perhaps thinking I'd go.
Well, interestingly, I was at the United Nations Oceans Conference, and the most unexpected brand that I met there was Salesforce.
So they've really harnessed nature to the degree where they, by operating in that space, by diverting some of their funds to nature projects, what they've actually ended up doing is positioning themselves in a market which influenced their next product. And the next product ended up being a kind of quantification tool, assessment tool for carbon and nature dependence, which has gone into the marketplace and is a really big revenue generator from them. And that was a direct product of just investing in a less specific way into being in that nature space. They've made it work very literally, very commercially for them in a number of ways. And they're not niche, and they're not kind of overly localized. In fact, they're not localized at all. So they're a really nice representation of a decent sized business making nature work for them.
That was an unexpected answer, but I agree. And I think it's funny, isn't it? Because you go and speak to various people in this world, and they'll talk about people or brands that have got nature on board, and have got pretty open natural products, but they're the expected. I think we need the unexpected case studies to show that it's possible outside of the most well-known environmental clothing brand in the world, for example. But yeah, look, I just want to talk about farming, and I want to talk about food a little bit. I was fortunate enough to grow up in Herefordshire, an agricultural county. And food is such a huge part to play here, and the growing of food and how we consume food. But look, I think we were talking about the fact that change is hard, isn't it? How do we make environmental transition less of a gamble for farmers and more of an opportunity, both practically and financially?
So agriculture, over and above land value, let's leave land value for a sec. Agriculture in the current scenario of rapid and unpredictable climate change is the gamble. So it is such a challenging business to be in. Year to year, there's such fluctuating conditions and tight margins that it's very, very difficult to build a strong business case from agriculture as you forecast over the next 5 or 10 years. That is the gamble. So what natural capital, what nature restoration with overlaid over a farming model can do is provide resilience to some of those truly variable conditions that farmers are having to endure. So if you can blend in 2, 3, 4 extra revenue streams that don't erode your agricultural output significantly, but do provide a revenue which is not correlated to the amount of rainfall or the price of your agricultural inputs as a result of geopolitical crisis, for example, but they give you they're an antidote to some of the problems that agriculture can face. That all comes down to design. So it takes some skill and ability to be able to design and overlay ecosystem restoration and kind of nature positive production within a farming enterprise that doesn't undermine the food production and actually does more than that. It provides the water resilience or the pollinator production or the soil health and underpins food production for the next generation. So we have extracted nearly all of the organic matter, all of the nutrient value in our soils in this country. Agriculture amounts to just below 70% of all of the land use in the UK by area. And a lot of that land is now an empty, what's the word I'm looking for?
Just like non-productive.
It's an empty material within which we need to put the inputs to make the growing of that crop possible. So one of the versions of long-term agricultural productivity and food security is to restore soil health to the point where we can continue to grow for the next 100 or 200 years. And one of the ways that we can do that is with dung beetles and deep-rooted herbs and floristic diversity and structural diversity. What I'm really describing here is rewilding, whereby we can cycle nutrients, we can cycle moisture, we can restore the organic matter and the structure of the soil to the point where it can be productive for the next 50 years. And providing there is enough of that activity happening simultaneously at any one point, then it can be disrupted. It can be farmed upon. It can be ploughed if you need it to be ploughed, as long as we've got a critical mass always in some sort of restoration process. So I don't think that the risk lives in bringing nature and the profits from nature into a farm business. I think the risk lives in not doing it.
And just like look at the opportunity of brands that then incorporate interesting brand storytelling, content, communications. Wild Farmed is a great example of this. You know, they didn't exist that long ago. I interviewed Andy before Wild Farmed, and now they're like, you know, probably one of the most exciting brands out of all businesses in the UK. I absolutely love how they just genuinely disrupt, but by doing things in a natural way. Need more wild farms, don't we?
Yeah, 100%. A demonstration of how you can add value to your core agricultural product with nature. I mean, it is, other than the fact their disruptive branding, their bright, bold colors, I love all of that. It's also, when it comes down to it, a demonstration of using nature to make your business better. It's entirely possible. And we've just got to shake the cage a bit. So people don't see nature as the risk. Nature is the answer.
One of the standout elements of your previous role at Belmont was the kind of on-site, human-driven nature connection that was, you know, really kind of central to the Belmont brand. We often talk about rewilding landscapes, but how do we also rewild people and reconnect communities to nature in a genuinely meaningful way?
That stuff at Belmont was and is awesome, and something that I think continues to make a real difference to people. And so rewilding people might mean two things. So we're all missing a connection to nature. We are all fundamentally disconnected from nature. Even we who think we're probably more connected than most, deep down we are far, far more disconnected from nature than we've ever been before as a society. And so rewilding people could mean just rebuilding that connection to nature, getting children into nature so that we are the spark that can set them on a pathway to nature connection and being immersed in this sector and playing out their role as the next generation of decision makers with care and responsibility and stewardship in mind. And I go back to a story about perhaps the spark in my family being my granddad. What greater role could we play than being that spark, in terms of although it would be almost impossible to quantify, that's probably one of the biggest ways that we can instigate change in our lifetime, is to provide as many sparks as we possibly can. And these projects that we end up doing, by virtue of their ecological ambition and by virtue of the fact that nature speaks right to our souls as humans, whether we know it or not, we are connected to nature and we respond to it. They provide an incredible platform to be able to dish out those sparks. So seeing a hare running across a field, hearing a cuckoo, these sadly are things which are special now, that are almost rare now. If we can provide that opportunity, then we can have a tremendous amount of impact. So, and natural capital helps here. So I'm sorry this might be a longer answer than you're anticipating, but when you sell natural capital, there are two versions of the market. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be carbon, could be nature, could be any of the things that we listed earlier. And one part of the market is just selling some units. And the buyer for just units wants units, as many as they can, for the smallest price they can possibly get away with paying. Now, I'm going to slide that side of the market over to one side because it's full of problems, full of issues, and it doesn't attend to many of the things which we at Restore, and I know you, are very passionate about. The other side of the market, we still deal in units. We still quantify things because people need things to be quantified often. Actually, what we are selling is story and narrative and ambition, and the people in a place really matter. And so you may have to construct it with units, but people are buying that, the difference, the impact, the connection that your project can afford, and they're doing so through units. And when you're operating in that side of the market, the question that gets asked is not what can I get for the smallest amount of money, it's how much can my money achieve.
Yeah.
So this was a grudge payment that I have to pay for nature, do I? Go on then, how much am I in for? As opposed to, okay, let's make this an opportunity. Yeah, you've got to pay for some nature because it's core to your business in some way. But look at what we can do with this storytelling ability to make that an opportunity, to tell the story of the amount of children that have visited this site, to tell the story of nature education, or this site is a platform for other farmers to learn to do things differently, to catalyze change over time. And the reason that matters is because it allows us to add value to that product. It's not the reason, it's one of the reasons that matters. It allows us to add value to our product, which allows us to build it into every project that we do.
Yeah.
So if you can get the buyer to value nature connection, to value amount of children on site for free, being inspired by the glory of the natural world, if you can actually get the buyer to value that, we can build it into our business models, and we can make every project we ever do include that as a core part.
Yeah.
So that's really wonderful.
It's true mission, isn't it?
Yeah. And again, a bit sad that you have to construct it with a commercial construct, but if it gets us where we need to get to, we can deal with the bigger societal issues later. And then the other thing that rewilding does mean, so rewilding is about process, not outcomes. That's the definition of rewilding. So if you are rewilding people, and this is so important, the analogy I often use is that we treat our headaches by taking some Nurofen. Other products exist. We don't assess what's giving us the headache in the first place. Yeah. Rewilding is the assessment of what gives you the headache. It's not the Nurofen. So rewilding people is critically important as we kind of struggle with various modern epidemics, like the mental emotional health epidemic and loneliness as an epidemic. We can, if we forget the Nurofen end of the deal and we look at the actual causes, we can use nature and rewilding to tackle those causes. We can get people into nature. We can increase mobility. We can increase connection with each other, with nature as the conduit, and deal with the processes rather than the outcomes.
Love that. Yeah, and again, it's just that kind of untapped opportunity for organizations who do put it central to their narrative. You can transport people and you can get people so enthused by your mission. We could chat for hours and hours and hours, but the plane is coming into land, or the train is coming into the station, as we should probably say on this podcast. I had the brilliant Rich Stockdale on the podcast, and you asked him a bit of a banger of a question. I sent him a text yesterday. I asked him if he would like to ask you a question live on the podcast, of which he's sent me a question, and he says, note to Joss, push him to not stay within realistic bounds. But I am going to ask you to answer it quickly. If Gil had a magic wand and could make any change to the sector, what would it be?
I'm going to stall for time by saying no one's ever asked me to stay within realistic bounds before. I don't think anyone expects me to do that. That's not my particular remit. So if I had a magic wand to change the sector, I would change it so that we valued nature. I'm going to rephrase it. I'm going to answer it in the same way, but I'm going to construct it in a more consumable order. So I would remove the words natural capital. The idea of natural and capital living in the same space is in my job title, by the way, I find really challenging. I would remove that business risk dependency narrative, and I would move us straight to the end game. And that end game is that we as a society and as human beings value nature for what it is. And we are comfortable saying the word spiritual. We're comfortable saying, understanding that we are nature and we're not separate from it. And so we dedicate a significant amount of our emotional, our commercial, our personal real estate to nature. For the sake of its glory, not because someone has put it into a spreadsheet. We will get there. We'll get there in 20 years' time, let's say. We have to use those constructs. We need to be talking about natural capital, risk, and dependency right now, because the piano is at the top of the stairs. It's about to start falling and we won't be able to stop it. So we can argue about natural capital later once we've got some nature to argue over. So it's entirely necessary now. The destination, though, is that we look back and think, oh my God, wasn't that clunky and clumsy? Nature is all.
He's got a second part to the question.
Which I only had one.
What are the biggest accepted myths hiding in plain sight in the environmental sector? Biggest accepted myths hiding in plain sight.
So I'm going to go back to something we've touched on before. So maybe it's a myth, maybe it's a misapprehension, but I want to just revisit food. So the single biggest myth stroke misapprehension in our sector and from outside of our sector looking in is the narrative of nature or food. So all of our food is nature. When you eat an apple, it's an engorged ovary. When you eat a potato, it's a swollen root node. Every element of our food production is nature. 70% of UK crops require animal pollination to exist in the first place. And so nature is what will give us food security going forward. It is not the enemy of food security. And we've got to harpoon those conversations. So we all need food. We all, in fact, I think are going to need intensive agriculture, but we need to decouple agriculture from external artificial inputs, which are expensive. They're hugely environmentally detrimental. They're going to run out, full stop. So agriculture cannot be built from them any longer, because in the next 50 years, they will cease to exist. And they're hugely susceptible to political and geopolitical volatilities. Nature is the answer, not the problem.
There you go, just mic drop, bam. Final takeaways, because we have 3 questions that we always ask our guests. So quick fire questions here. Favorite book or podcast in or outside of business or nature?
I don't have any outside of business or nature to offer you, I'm afraid. My favorite book is 2 books. And it's to try and reflect both sides of me as a coin, perhaps. So one of the books is actually pretty rubbish. I hope that they'll never hear this podcast, but it's not brilliantly well written and I can't find it anymore, but it's a book called Grandfather. And it tells the story of a Native American.
Okay.
And that Native American chap exists at a time when kind of modern conventional America is creeping into his life. And so, in fact, it's not creeping, it's kind of exploding into his life, disrupting all the things that he has known for his whole life. But the real narrative behind that story is his profound connection to nature. And his profound connection to nature takes half a lifetime to accrue and some incredible kind of trials by immersion to get there. And it culminates in spirituality. It culminates in a level of spirituality which, as a literal example, there's a moment where he's standing on one side of the crest of a hill and he knows there are 2 deer on the other side. He hasn't seen them and he has no idea how he knows. And that is described as a kind of spiritual acknowledgement. When you dig down into it, what it actually is a profound connection in nature, even at a subconscious level. He is hearing and smelling and absorbing cues from that environment, even at a level below which he's able to consciously process. And I love the blending of nature as a spiritual entity and connection. I think it's really important. I think it's our destination, as we talked about earlier. And I'd like to throw in another book, or books, or any content that's ever come from Oliver Rackham. So Oliver Rackham was this dude of a kind of environmentalist and ecologist. And he, although he has ruined every walk I've ever been on. So the books he writes allow you to decode and unpack your landscape and to interpret it as you walk along. So the shape of a tree, a ditch or a bank system, what that means in terms of the age of that landscape, who did it. If a tree grows outwards in a great big parkland form, it tells you that it's grown in space for its whole life. This tree might be 500 years old, which tells you a story about that landscape going back 500 years. And you can walk along and you might be in the middle of a woodland or a forest and you see this great big oak tree with its arms thrown wide open, and yet there are trees for miles around. And that tells you in an instant that oak tree grew up in an entirely different landscape and it's changed in a relatively short period of time in recent history. Anyway, the kind of tangible gobbets of information and narrative about interpreting your landscape that Oliver Rackham and his compendium of works allows you to absorb are awesome, although they will take the joyful naivety out of your country walks for the rest of your life. Well,
I definitely enjoy all the times that we have walks together. So big ups, Oliver. So I know you're going wild camping tonight. You've got a big day out in nature. You're driving to a destination. What artist or album are you putting on the stereo? Yeah, as you head out into the natural world, what's your go-to?
Joss, I suspect this question exists because most of the time you're sitting opposite much younger, much cooler people than me. So I'm going to corrupt and destroy any level of coolness that this question might have carried previously. So I like old stuff. I will probably listen to Bill Withers on the way. I love Bill Withers, and if I can get away with it without my 11-year-old boy kind of insisting that it gets turned off immediately, I'll find time to put some Johnny Cash on because I love country music.
And if you could collaborate with one person of influence in a nature campaign, who would it be and why?
So I'd like 2 people, please. I would like Henry Dimbleby to come along because the level of insight that he brings with regard to food strategy is awesome. But then I want a rambunctious disruptor to come with. So then maybe, to go back to a Wild Farm reference, we'll bring Andy Cato along, or just someone who's going to turn the tables over. And I want both. And I think that's utterly critical. If we genuinely are trying to change things, you need insight and you need clarity and you need respected opinions and you need to turn a few tables over. And so I'm seeking to bring those 2 things together.
I think that's doable as well.
Brilliant.
I like that. Let's get those 2 together.
And I'll turn some tables over as well if anyone will let me. Maybe I'll do it sort of slowly so nothing gets broken. Yeah.
Gil, we've run out of time. I think next time we do this, we're going to have to record out in nature. You're an absolute legend, honestly, an absolute visionary, a beacon of impact. And I know that you don't like hearing that, but yeah, honestly, there's truly nobody who has the drive, skill set, presentation ability than you. And I wish you all the luck in restoring your wider vision. And thanks for being on Shifting the Narrative.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for the relentless, unrealistic level of praise.
Spuds.